You know, sometimes, life just has this funny way of circling back. I just finished up a call with some investors, talking about an $800,000 deal that would let me really expand my agency, hire a whole team, scale nationally. I mean, we were talking about hitting $3 million in revenue this year. So, yeah, I was feeling pretty good when I walked to the door, expecting a delivery, and instead, there she was. Chloe. Standing right there, on my doorstep. Looking, well, she looked like she'd been crying. Makeup smudged, hair pulled back in a messy bun, and in her hand, that same familiar suitcase she'd walked out with 2 years earlier. She didn't ask if she could come in. She just started talking, rambling about how Justin had broken up with her. Said he called her too demanding, too high maintenance. Then she looked up at me, eyes wide and watery, saying she'd realized she'd made a horrible mistake leaving me. I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, not moving aside. I just listened. It was like a script she'd rehearsed, all about second chances, about how money doesn't buy happiness. To understand how we got to that moment, with her on my doorstep, a wreck, and me, well, me not quite a wreck, we have to go back. Chloe and I dated for 3 years. The last 18 months, we even lived together in a decent 2-bedroom apartment in Austin. I was a digital marketing manager, making about $78,000 a year. Stable, comfortable. Nothing crazy. Chloe, she worked part-time at a boutique downtown, probably pulling in $26,000. She always talked about taking courses to level up, but I never actually saw her finish any of them. I drove a 2018 Mazda 6, paid most of our bills, and spent my evenings building a side consulting business. I wanted more than just a steady paycheck. Chloe liked nice things. Expensive brunches. Designer bags she'd save up for. Weekend trips to Napa Valley. And I didn't mind covering most of it, because I thought we were building something together. The problems, they started slow. The kind of thing you notice but tell yourself you're probably overreacting to. She'd come home from networking events at 11 at night, smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. And if I asked how it went, she'd get defensive, say I was being paranoid. She started talking more and more about these successful men she'd meet, how they drove luxury cars, how they invested in themselves. My buddy Sam, he warned me pretty early on. Bro, he'd say, she's shopping around, and you're the safety net while she tests the market. I brushed it off. I loved her, and I truly thought she loved me back. I was working 12, sometimes 14-hour days, between my job and my side business, trying to build something real. She complained that I wasn't present enough, or that I was always working, even though the money I made was funding the lifestyle she wanted. Then came the night everything changed. Honestly, I should have seen it coming. I got home around 8 after a client call, picked up Thai food on the way because I knew she liked it, and found her sitting at the kitchen table. She had this weird, formal energy, like she'd been rehearsing something. Hands folded. Expression serious. I knew, before she even opened her mouth, that this was planned. Daniel, we need to talk. I set the food down, sat across from her. She went into this whole speech about how she'd been doing a lot of thinking, how we wanted different things. She said I was safe and stable, but she needed someone who matched her ambition, who could provide the lifestyle she deserved without her having to worry about money. And then came the line. The one I'll never forget. She looked me right in the eye and said, I think we're better as friends. Like she was doing me some kind of favor. I just sat there for a second. Processing. And then it hit me, something that probably should have clicked months earlier. She wasn't leaving because we weren't compatible. She was leaving because she'd found someone with more money, and she was trying to make it sound noble. I could have argued. Could have asked her to reconsider. Could have promised to work less, or make more, or whatever she wanted to hear. But instead, I just said, okay. If that's what you want. She blinked at me. Like I'd just spoken a foreign language. And I watched her face shift from serious to confused, then almost angry. She clearly expected me to fight for her, to break down, to give her that dramatic movie moment where the guy realizes what he's losing and begs her to stay. Instead, I asked if she needed help packing, or if she had somewhere to go tonight. Completely calm, like we were discussing a work project. She mumbled something about staying with a friend and coming back for her stuff over the weekend. I said that was fine. I'd make sure I wasn't home, so she could take whatever she needed without it being awkward. The confusion on her face turned into something else. Frustration? Disappointment? I don't know. She just grabbed her pre-packed suitcase from the bedroom and left without another word. I sat there in the quiet apartment, the Thai food getting cold on the table. And instead of feeling sad, I felt this weird sense of relief. Like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there until it was gone. That night, I opened a spreadsheet and calculated exactly how much money I'd been spending on her every month. Rent, food, entertainment, trips, all of it. It came out to around $1,400 that would now stay in my pocket. Money I could invest back into my business. The next morning, I woke up and went to work like nothing had happened. Because honestly, nothing had really changed, except I didn't have to pretend anymore. Sam called me around lunch, asked how I was doing. I told him I was fine. It seemed to confuse him more than anything. He kept waiting for me to have some breakdown, to show up at his place drunk and angry, but it never came. Instead, I threw myself into work, both my day job and my consulting business. Within 2 weeks, I landed my first major client, a $15,000 project. Something that would have been impossible to focus on if Chloe had still been around, demanding my attention. I remember sitting at my desk after I closed that deal, looking at the contract, and thinking, losing her might genuinely be the best financial decision of my life. Even if it wasn't one I'd made on purpose. She texted me a few times in those first weeks, asking how I was doing, saying she hoped we could still be friends, like she'd suggested. I kept my responses short, polite. The way you'd respond to a coworker you barely know. I'm good. Hope you're well. That was about as much as she'd get. And I could tell from the way she kept trying to extend the conversations that this wasn't what she expected either. Sam would show me her Instagram sometimes. Pictures of her at fancy restaurants, designer bags, a new guy's arm around her shoulder in every third post. Clearly showing off her upgraded life. I didn't follow her anymore. Didn't check up on her. Didn't care. I was too busy building something real. Something that was mine. Something nobody could take away from me by deciding I wasn't ambitious enough. One random evening, Sam sent me a screenshot. Bro, he captioned it, check out your upgrade. It was Chloe at some rooftop restaurant, champagne glass in hand, leaning against a guy in a tailored suit who looked like he'd just stepped out of a finance bro starter pack. Designer watch, perfect hair, that confident smirk that screams, I have money and I want you to know it. The caption was something about finally being treated right, with a bunch of hashtags about luxury lifestyle and knowing your worth. I looked at it for maybe 5 seconds, sent Sam a thumbs up, and went back to my proposal. I had a deadline, and her validation posts weren't paying my bills. The guy's name was Justin Brooks. I only knew that because mutual friends couldn't help themselves from filling me in on all the details I never asked for. He was 32, worked in investment banking, drove a BMW M5, and lived in one of those luxury high-rises in the bustling heart of downtown Miami. According to the gossip chain, they'd met at one of those networking events Chloe used to come home late from. Which told me everything I needed to know about the timeline of our breakup. Sam had this theory that she'd been lining him up for months before she ever gave me the better as friends speech. And honestly, the math checked out. She didn't leave me then find someone better. She found someone with more money, and then manufactured a reason to leave that made her feel less guilty. What made it interesting was watching how fast her lifestyle changed. Within a month of us breaking up, she went from part-time boutique work to basically being a full-time Instagram influencer whose entire content was, "Look at this expensive thing my boyfriend bought me." Chloe had gone from splitting appetizers to posting about omakase dinners that cost more than her old monthly paycheck. From saving up for one designer bag to having a collection that grew every week. From my Mazda to private car services. Sam would analyze it like a financial consultant. He'd say, "She's not paying for any of this. She's just traded one ATM for a bigger one." And he wasn't wrong. She'd found exactly what she said she wanted, someone who could provide that lifestyle without her having to think about money. And based on her posts, she was living her best life. Meanwhile, my side business was actually taking off in ways I hadn't expected. That $15,000 client turned into 3 more referrals. Suddenly, I was pulling in $8,000 to $12,000 per project on top of my salary. I was working insane hours, sometimes 14-hour days. But the difference was, nobody was complaining that I wasn't present enough, or that I prioritized work over spending money on expensive brunches. I had freedom for the first time in years. Freedom to build something without someone constantly measuring my worth against other men's bank accounts. My apartment stayed clean. My fridge had actual food instead of expensive takeout containers. And that $1,400 a month I wasn't spending on someone else's lifestyle? It was going straight into business investments and savings. About 3 months after the breakup, Chloe started reaching out again, but it was subtle at first. The kind of thing you could almost convince yourself was innocent. She'd send me texts late at night saying she missed our conversations. Or she'd share some memory about a place we used to go, with a "remember when" attached to it. I kept my responses the way I'd kept them from the start. Short. Polite. Completely devoid of emotional investment. "Yeah, that was nice." Or "Hope you're doing well." Nothing more. I wasn't being mean. I wasn't being cold. I was just treating her exactly like what she said she wanted to be, a friend. And apparently, that wasn't sitting right with her, because the messages kept getting more frequent and more pointed. Then came the night she called me at 1 a.m. from a club. Music blasting in the background, her words slightly slurred. Telling me she was out with Justin, but she was bored. And she kept thinking about me. I was in bed, actually getting decent sleep for once. I remember just lying there in the dark, listening to her ramble about how different everything was now, how sometimes she missed the simple times we had together. When she finally paused for breath, I told her she should probably go back to her date, and that I hoped she had a good night. Then I hung up before she could respond. Sam thought it was hilarious when I told him the next day. He said she was already realizing that money doesn't buy personality, and that Justin probably bored her to death between transactions. The real shift happened around month 6, when I landed a contract that changed everything. A company wanted me to handle their entire digital marketing strategy. $80,000 upfront, plus bonuses tied to performance. And they wanted to discuss bringing me on retainer for the next year. I quit my day job 2 weeks later, moved to a better apartment in a nicer part of Austin, and suddenly I wasn't the guy grinding in the shadows anymore. I was the guy other people in my industry were talking about. My income basically tripled overnight. For the first time since the breakup, I actually felt like I was building the life I'd always wanted, instead of just surviving and trying to prove something to someone who didn't care. That's when Chloe started showing up in places I'd go. It was too frequent to be coincidence. I'd be at a coffee shop I'd never been to before, and she'd walk in 10 minutes later, acting surprised to see me. Or I'd be at a networking event, and she'd appear with Justin, making sure to stop by and chat like we were old friends catching up. She'd compliment my new watch, my new clothes, ask about work in a way that felt like she was fishing for information about how much I was making. Justin would stand there, looking bored, checking his phone, while she found reasons to extend the conversation. And I'd keep everything surface level and polite before excusing myself to talk to literally anyone else. Sam started calling her a financial stalker. And honestly, it wasn't far off. The most obvious incident was when she somehow found out which gym I joined and suddenly had a membership there, too. Showing up during the exact times I usually worked out. I'd see her on the treadmill, facing the weight section where I'd be. Or she'd coincidentally need to use the machine right next to mine, always starting conversations about how crazy it was that we both ended up at the same place. After the third time in 1 week, I switched gyms entirely. Didn't tell anyone which one. Paid extra for a membership across town just to avoid the awkwardness. When Sam asked why I switched, I told him the truth. She was hunting for proximity, and I wasn't interested in being anyone's backup plan or curiosity. What really struck me during all of this was how transparent her motivations were becoming. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of me I was becoming, the version that had money and success and could give her the validation she craved without her having to rely entirely on Justin. I was supposed to stay the struggling guy, working too much and making too little, the safe backup option who'd always be there if things didn't work out with her upgrade. But instead, I'd actually upgraded myself. And that wasn't part of her plan. She wanted me to be stuck where she left me, so she could feel better about her choices. And the fact that I wasn't stuck, that I was actually thriving without her, seemed to bother her more than anything else about the situation. So that brings us back to my doorstep. To Chloe, standing there with that suitcase. As she finished her rehearsed speech about second chances, about money not buying happiness, what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known because I'd kept my business growth relatively quiet on social media, was that I wasn't the same person she'd left anymore. I wasn't the guy working $78,000 a year and grinding on side projects in a modest apartment in Fairfax. I was running an agency projected to hit $3 million in revenue this year. I'd just put a down payment on a house, and I was seeing someone new, a woman named Sophia who ran her own successful consulting firm and didn't need me to fund her lifestyle. But Chloe was still operating on old information. Still thinking I was probably single and struggling, and would be grateful she came back. And I could see it in the way she talked, like she was doing me a favor by giving me another shot. I was about to tell her this wasn't a good time when my phone rang. I saw it was Sam calling. So I just answered it, right there in the doorway, while she stood waiting. Sam was calling about meeting up later to celebrate the investor deal. He was loud enough that I knew Chloe could hear him talking about the $800,000 and asking if I'd picked up the Mercedes yet, or if I was still driving the Mazda. I watched her face change in real time. Watched the recognition hit her that something fundamental had shifted since she'd last checked in on my life. When I hung up, she asked me directly if what Sam said was true. If my business was really worth that much now. I told her honestly that it was doing well. Better than I'd expected. The energy in the conversation changed immediately, like a switch had flipped in her brain. Suddenly, she wasn't the apologetic ex-girlfriend seeking forgiveness. She was practically vibrating with this manic energy, talking about how she'd always believed in me, how she knew I'd be successful, and how we could be so good together now that we were both in better places. She started touching my arm, leaning in closer, saying things about how Justin never really understood her the way I did, and how money didn't matter to her anymore because she'd learned what was really important. I just stood there, watching this performance. This complete transformation from sad and desperate to calculated and opportunistic. And I realized she hadn't learned anything at all. She hadn't learned that money doesn't matter. She just learned that I had more of it now. And that made me valuable again, in her eyes. I told her straight up that I appreciated her coming by, but I wasn't interested in revisiting what we had. That I'd moved on, and I was happy with where my life was now. She tried to argue, said I was being unfair, that everyone deserves a second chance, that she'd changed and grown and wasn't the same person who left. I pointed out that she'd shown up with a suitcase the same day Justin dumped her. That if she'd really changed, she would have reached out months ago, when I was still in my old apartment, and not right after finding out about my success. She got defensive, her voice rising, saying I was twisting things and that she genuinely cared about me and this had nothing to do with money. So, I asked her directly. If I'd still been making $78,000 and driving the Mazda, would you be standing here right now with that suitcase? And she couldn't answer. Just stood there, opening and closing her mouth, like she was trying to find words that wouldn't prove my point. That's when she started crying again. But this time, it felt different. More angry than sad. And she raised her voice enough that I noticed my neighbor across the hall peek out their door to see what was happening. She accused me of being cruel, of holding grudges, of never really loving her if I could just shut her out like this after everything we'd been through together. I stayed calm. I told her I wasn't shutting her out. I was just treating her exactly like what she'd asked to be 2 years ago. A friend. And friends don't move in together, and friends don't get back together after messy breakups. She actually laughed at that, this bitter sound, and said I was being petty, and that I'd regret this when I realized how rare real connection was. I told her I'd found real connection with someone who didn't need me to prove my worth with a bank statement. And that seemed to be the final straw, because she grabbed her suitcase and told me I'd changed, and not in a good way. Sam showed up about 10 minutes after she left. I told him the whole story while we sat in my living room. He immediately pulled out his phone and showed me that he'd actually recorded part of the argument from the hallway because he'd arrived right when she started yelling and wanted evidence in case she tried to spin some story later. We watched it back. It was almost surreal, seeing myself stay completely composed while she spiraled. Sam kept pausing it to point out moments where you could see her calculating, adjusting her approach, trying different angles to get the response she wanted. He said I'd handled it perfectly. That some people only value you when they think you're valuable to others. And that Chloe had shown exactly who she was twice now. Once when she left, and once when she tried to come back. 6 months later, my business hit $3.2 million in revenue. I'd moved into my house, picked up a Mercedes E-Class, and Sophia and I were planning a trip to Europe together. I heard through mutual friends that Chloe had moved back in with her parents after burning through what little money she had, that she was working at a call center and posting vague things on social media about finding herself and learning hard lessons. I didn't feel bad for her, and I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt grateful. Grateful that she'd left when she did. Grateful that I'd never begged her to stay. Grateful that sometimes, the trash really does take itself out and gives you the space to build something better than you ever could have with dead weight holding you back. Do you think I handled that last conversation the right way?